Hello, my name is Odessia. For years, I smiled beside a man who shattered me behind closed doors. He was everyone's hero, but my silence made him stronger. Each night, he'd hurt me, and each morning, I'd cover the bruises and pour his coffee like nothing happened. My own family said, "At least he provides." But when I finally disappeared, his perfect world started to rot. They called it sudden, but it wasn't sudden. It was survival. And now I wonder, if I hadn't left, would anyone have noticed I was gone at all? They say a wedding is the happiest day of a woman's life. But standing at the altar that warm spring afternoon in Springfield, Missouri, with my hands trembling under the weight of white silk, I felt nothing but resignation. Everyone smiled, even the minister. My mother's eyes were glassy with pride, and Callista, my older sister, was snapping photos from the front pew like we were wrapping up a magazine shoot. I stood there, a passenger in my own life, watching it all unfold like I was already miles away. "You're the youngest," Mom had said weeks earlier, while folding towels as if it were a casual Tuesday. "You don't get to choose. We're giving you a stableman." Marston looked every bit the stableman. He wore his reputation like a polished badge, charitable, respected, always knew what to say in front of people. He was 10 years older, ran a chain of hardware stores, and he always had a firm handshake. People called him reliable, dependable, a good catch. But I never felt like I caught anything, more like I was traded off. Callista had whispered to me outside the bridal suite, mascara wand in hand. "At least he looks good in photos," she said, dabbing a concealer under my eye and not even noticing that I wasn't smiling. At the reception, everyone laughed. We danced for a few minutes, but I remember how his hand gripped my waist too tight. My ribs ached beneath the dress. At dinner, he barely spoke to me, but he smiled for every photo. When the day finally died down and the house was quiet, I sat on the edge of the bed in our new home, folding the same towels Mom had folded weeks before. My hands shook. I tried to remember what I was supposed to do as a wife. Was I doing it right? Then it happened. I spilled a glass of water while setting it on the nightstand. It clinked as it tipped, splashing across the wooden surface. I gasped and reached for a tissue. Too late. He didn't say a word, just turned, eyes sharp and cold, and slapped me hard across the face. The sting landed before I processed the movement. My head tilted from the force. His voice followed, calm, as if discussing the weather. "Don't embarrass me again." There was no shouting. No rage, just a quiet menace that filled the room like poison in still water. I didn't cry. I don't know if I was in shock or if part of me had expected it. I just stood there, hand pressed to my cheek, heartbeat drumming inside my skull. I thought about leaving. Right then, grabbing the keys, getting into the car. But her voice rang in my ears, my mother's. "Don't shame this family." So I stayed. The next morning, I wore foundation and sunglasses and joined him for breakfast. The air smelled like toast and bacon, but everything tasted metallic. He read the newspaper. I sipped coffee. Neither of us said a word about the night before. I waited until he left for work to call my mom. She didn't answer the first time. When she finally did, her voice was tired. "He hit me," I said. Quiet, almost ashamed. There was a pause, then a sigh. "Men don't mean it when they hit once," she said. "It's the stress. Don't let one bad moment define your marriage." I hung up before saying another word. Later, I called Callista. She was at some parent-teacher meeting and answered with that chirpy tone she always used when other people were around. "Callie, it happened," I said. "He hit me." She didn't even miss a beat. "Oh, Des, you always overreact. Be grateful. You married up. You've got a house, a car, a man who shows up. You think every woman gets that?" That was the moment I understood something painful and permanent. No one was going to stand up for me. I returned to my new role with practiced precision. I cooked, I cleaned, I nodded when spoken to, and I made sure the bruises didn't show. Scarves in summer, heavy makeup in spring. I even learned which angles worked best in photos. I stopped trying to talk about it. Instead, I wrote, "If I pretend hard enough," I scribbled in a leather-bound journal I hid beneath the bed, "maybe it will go away. Maybe it'll get better. Maybe I'm just not trying hard enough." There were nights I'd lie awake while Marston snored beside me. I'd stare at the ceiling, counting the slow hums of the fan blades. I thought about all the stories we're told as little girls, about love, devotion, and how sacrifice is beautiful. They never told us what to do when sacrifice becomes survival. One night, I turned toward him in the dark, just to see his face in the moonlight. His jaw was slack, mouth slightly open, one hand curled near his chest like a child. But I knew better. I knew the venom he hid behind those smiles, the calculation in his charm. The man everyone respected wasn't the man lying next to me. I whispered so softly I barely heard myself. This is not the life I chose, but maybe it's the one I was sentenced to. I placed the frame back on the shelf with a care I didn't feel. The smile in the photo looked foreign, a strained version of myself that no longer lived in my skin. My fingertips brushed the edge of the glass before I pulled the curtain shut, letting the room fall into soft darkness. "If I disappear, would anyone even notice?" I whispered. No one answered. A week later, on a Thursday night that had dragged like wet wool across my body, it happened again. This time, we were arguing, though that word feels too polite for what it was. He came home angry. His warehouse had been audited, and someone found irregularities. I made the mistake of asking if he was okay. "Don't act like you care," Marston said without looking at me, slamming his keys on the counter. I was just, "Don't finish that sentence," he snapped. "You're not smart enough to understand half of what I deal with." I should have walked away. I should have gone upstairs, closed the door, done what I always did, stay quiet. But something inside me cracked, just a little. "You think I don't see the way you hide things?" I said, softly but firmly. "The accounts, the phone calls you take outside. You think I don't notice?" His jaw tensed. He took 2 steps forward, and before I could blink, his hand was on my shoulder. He shoved me back, hard. I lost my footing. The hallway wall met the right side of my ribcage like concrete. Pain flared through my torso, sharp and immediate. I crumpled, breathless, and for a moment I saw nothing but stars. He didn't reach for me, didn't ask if I was all right, just stood there, breathing through his nose like I'd ruined his night. "You're so dramatic," he muttered, turning away. I laid there for a long time. I don't remember how I made it to the living room, only that the couch felt miles away and my side throbbed with every breath. Later, I must have passed out because when I opened my eyes, the room was dim and quiet. Marston was gone. I tried to call my mother. No answer. I texted Callista. "I think I need help." It showed as delivered. No reply. It wasn't until the neighbor, Mrs. Chambers, knocked on the door the next morning and saw me hunched over the kitchen sink that someone did something. "I'm calling an ambulance," she said, not asking. At the emergency room, the nurse asked for my emergency contact. I stared at the intake form for too long. "I don't have one right now," I finally said. They asked what happened. I lied, said I slipped on the stairs. The nurse didn't believe me. I could see it in her eyes, but she didn't push. An hour later, they told me I had a fractured rib. Nothing could be done but rest and manage the pain. I nodded, biting the inside of my cheek so I wouldn't cry. Marston showed up just before discharge. He didn't ask how I felt, didn't even look me in the eye. "You good?" he asked, picking up his phone while signing the insurance paperwork. "They asked me to sign something earlier," I said, handing over the waiver I'd filled out. He looked down. "You used the wrong name." "No," I said. "I didn't." He didn't respond, but his lips pressed into a thin line. I'd signed the waiver using my mother's maiden name. I didn't think about it. My hand did it on its own, as if some buried part of me was desperate to distance myself from him, even on paper. That night, he didn't speak to me. We ate in silence. I chewed each bite slowly, not because I was savoring anything, but because every movement sent a jolt through my side. The next weekend, we drove to my parents' house for brunch. It was Callista's idea. "It'll be good for the family to see you," she said on the phone. Put the drama behind us. Her drama was my body screaming every time I stood up. We arrived late. Everyone was already gathered around the dining room table, talking over one another. Mom was plating biscuits. Dad poured coffee. Callista entered with her husband and their son, little Ethan, in matching sweaters. Everyone fussed over him. Mom kissed him twice. Dad lifted him into the air like he was royalty. I took a seat at the far end of the table. No one noticed. Callista passed by me and leaned in, smile still plastered on her face. You always make things so heavy. Don't ruin the mood, okay? I wanted to ask her what part of me bleeding internally was the joke, but I just nodded, and she walked away like she'd done something noble. While everyone laughed about a church bake sale, I sat there, fork untouched, nursing a pain deeper than my cracked rib. Callista really made something of herself, Mom said later, patting her oldest daughter's arm. Always knew how to handle her man. Some girls just have that instinct. No one looked at me. That night, back in our home, I changed out of my church dress and stood in front of my dresser. My body ached. My cheek was still swollen. My rib throbbed like it was still being pushed into drywall. I opened the top drawer and pulled out our wedding photo, its frame dust-covered and tucked behind some old holiday cards. When I wiped the glass, I noticed something strange. It had been placed behind Callista's family portrait. She had placed herself in front of my marriage, literally, as if even in photographs, she came first. I stared at the photo for a long time, the two of us frozen in smiles that never belonged to us. If I disappear, I said aloud, would anyone even notice? The next morning, I woke up before the sun, even though I hadn't slept. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I moved like a ghost from one room to the next, checking if I was still there, if I still existed in that space. The walls didn't answer me, but I think they remembered. I think they were starting to hear me. Later that week, I received a call at work. One of the receptionists passed it to me with a strange look on her face. Some loan officer from the credit union, she said. Something about missed payments? I took the call in the supply closet, the only place where Marston wouldn't hear me later, and asked questions. Mrs. Langston, this is Henry from TriStar Credit. We've reached out several times about the delinquent payments on your home equity line. I'm sorry, what? I interrupted. We don't have a home equity loan. That's a mistake. There was a short pause. Paper shuffled on the other end. It's under your name. We've got a signed authorization and disbursement from last fall. Fall. That was when I was recovering from the hospital visit, the one where I'd fractured a rib and signed in under my maiden name. I asked for a copy. He said he could email it. I hung up, hand trembling slightly, and checked my inbox from the desktop at work. There it was, my name, my social security number, my forged signature, and Marston's fingerprints all over the details. That night at dinner, I waited until he was halfway through his drink. Did you take out a loan using my name? I asked plainly. He didn't flinch. He chewed, swallowed, took another sip. I used it for the both of us, he said finally. You should be thankful you even have credit. I've done more with your name than you ever would have. The words sat in the air like a slap. Cold, heavy, final. I didn't sign anything, he smirked. Prove it. I knew then that this wasn't a mistake. It was a strategy. He didn't just want me silent. He wanted me stuck. Financially, legally, invisibly trapped. 3 days later, we had dinner with his colleagues. A formal work event. I wore a navy dress and heels that pinched. I kept my mouth shut most of the night until one of the wives brought up managing bills. Oh, I leave that to him, she laughed. I'm useless with numbers. Marston raised his glass and chimed in, loud enough for the whole table to hear. Don't worry, they're all like that. Women aren't wired for financial literacy. Everyone chuckled, except me. I pay my bills, I said quietly. Or I did before someone started borrowing my name. His eyes cut toward me, warning, sharp. You're tired, he said quickly, waving a hand toward the server. Ignore her. She gets dramatic after 9 p.m. That night, back home, he didn't just scold me, he dismantled me. You're naive, he spat, removing his cufflinks. Ungrateful. You think anyone else would put up with you? I didn't cry. I didn't respond. I just turned toward the kitchen and began clearing dishes while my mind spun. Over the next 2 weeks, I started pulling my credit reports, quietly, strategically, late at night while he was snoring in front of the TV. There were 3 credit cards I didn't recognize, an auto insurance policy I hadn't signed, and a life insurance document filed 3 months after our wedding. That last one stopped me cold. It had my name, my birth date, my signature, only I never signed it. The sole beneficiary, Marston Langston. I found the envelope shoved deep into the bottom drawer of the hallway filing cabinet, the one he told me to never touch because it held work stuff. The paper was slightly creased, probably folded in a hurry. I read it twice, then a third time. He took out a life insurance policy on me. The policy was large, well beyond what someone would call standard. My chest tightened. My throat dried. The realization sat in my gut like a stone. If I died, he'd be fine. No, he'd be richer. And it hit me. Not all bruises show up on skin. Some crawl inside you and sit there, daring you to call them what they are. Murder isn't always a sudden act. Sometimes it's a setup, a plan. I paced the kitchen. My legs wouldn't stay still. My breathing grew shallow. I clutched the paper like it might disappear. He'd never said it aloud, but everything pointed to this truth. I wasn't safe, and I had no way out. The house? In his name. The car? His parents bought it. The bank account? Joint, but he controlled the logins. My phone? On his family plan. Even my email had been set up by him when we first got engaged. I'd never bothered to change it. It felt romantic at the time. Now it felt like a leash. I considered going to the police. But what would I tell them? That my husband had forged my signature? That he took out loans in my name and joked about how dumb I was? There'd be paperwork, court filings, maybe even confrontation. And how would I get to the police station? In his car? Using his gas card? That night, I sat in the bathroom and stared at my reflection. Not the face, just the eyes. They didn't look broken. They looked alert, calculating. If he ever thinks I'm more valuable dead than alive, I said, the words sticking in my throat. I need to move before he does. I laid the pen down after writing that final sentence in my new journal, closed the cover, and let my fingers rest on the leather for a moment. There was a strange comfort in the act, different from the first journal I kept hidden under the bed. This one wasn't for remembering, it was for keeping score. The next morning, as I was folding laundry, Marston came in from his office holding his phone like it had just delivered divine truth. "You need to be dressed by 4, he said, eyes still glued to the screen. "Channel 9 is filming the church rebuild piece tonight. I want you standing next to me when I speak." "Do I get a line?" I asked, half joking, half exhausted. He finally looked up. "Don't start." I didn't answer, just nodded. Later that day, we arrived at the church parking lot right as the news van was backing in. A few people from the congregation were already milling around the new building materials stacked neatly in front of the camera frame. Marston shook hands with the pastor, laughed with the camera crew, and stood proudly under a banner that read, "Rebuilding with Faith." When the interview began, I stood 2 steps behind him, slightly to the right, deliberately placed so I wouldn't distract the lens. I listened as the anchor called him a generous soul, a humble man of faith, and an example of servant leadership. She smiled warmly when she said it. And me? I was a background blur, no title, no introduction, just a woman standing silently, like a ghost. "They're praising the man who bruised my ribs," I whispered under my breath. That night, at the community banquet that followed, I was pulled aside by a woman in pearls who smiled with empty sweetness. "You must be so proud. Not all women are lucky enough to land someone who gives back like he does." I smiled back. "Yes, it's a blessing." She moved on. I stood still, sipping lukewarm punch that tasted like regret. Then the event organizer called Marston up to the stage to accept an award for civic impact. There was polite applause, flashing cameras. The room dimmed slightly as a slideshow of his achievements played behind him, and then, without warning, he reached back and took my hand. "Come up here, sweetheart," he said into the microphone. "Say a few words." The spotlight hit my face like a slap. I blinked, caught off guard, mouth dry. I hadn't prepared anything. I hadn't even known I'd be acknowledged. But before I could step forward, my mother, Vera, suddenly stood from the front row, clutching her clutch and stepping into the aisle like she'd been waiting for her moment. "We're grateful," she said, voice steady, smile fixed. "We're grateful he gave our daughter a good life." Laughter, applause, cameras clicking. I stepped back. I wasn't needed. Marston smiled and kissed my cheek in front of everyone. It felt like being erased in plain sight. Back at home, after I hung up my coat, I confronted him in the kitchen. "You forged my name on loan papers." He didn't pause, just opened the fridge and pulled out a drink. "Well, you better stop playing victim," he said, twisting the cap. "You're embarrassing us both." "I'm serious, Marston." He turned, sipped slowly, then chuckled. "What are you gonna do? Write a blog post?" I stood there, knuckles whitening on the edge of the counter. "You think you're untouchable?" I said. "No," he said, setting the bottle down. "I know I am." He walked out of the room, leaving the smell of cologne and arrogance behind him. That Sunday, we went to brunch at my parents' place. The usual spread: fruit salad, quiche, bacon that tasted like it had been microwaved too long. The whole family was there, including Callista and her perfect little family. Halfway through the meal, while I was silently trying to chew without flinching, my jaw still sore from where he'd grabbed it a few nights earlier, my mother raised her glass. "To Marston," she said proudly. "He's the man this family needed. Strong, reliable. A blessing. And at least he makes money," Callista added, nudging her husband, who laughed awkwardly. "Mine just makes messes." Everyone laughed. I smiled too. Or at least I moved my lips the right way. Inside, I was screaming. But you can't scream in a room full of applause. That night, when the house was quiet and Marston had drifted off on the couch in front of the late news, I pulled out the journal. I didn't write about how I felt. I wrote what I saw. March 12th, overdraft from joint account for unknown purchase. March 13th, verbal insult during breakfast. You're dead weight. March 15th, grabbed wrist during argument about groceries. March 18th, invoice from credit line opened in my name in October. I listed them, dated them, documented them like evidence. Not to make sense of it, but to make sure when the time came, I wouldn't forget a thing. I capped the pen, placed the journal back in its hiding spot behind the linen closet shelf, and whispered into the darkness, "He will not see me coming." The sound of his voice playing back through that little recorder didn't shake me the way I thought it might. No tears came, no outrage, just a strange stillness, like I was watching the aftermath of a storm from the safety of high ground. I sat on the edge of the bathtub for a long while, the words echoing from that small device, words I'd heard so many times in real life they had begun to blur. "You're lucky I don't do worse to you." That night, after I made sure Marston was fully asleep on the couch, I slipped quietly into the spare bedroom. Once his office, now my hiding place. I pulled out the shoebox tucked deep behind old tax files and water-stained magazines and added the recorder to the growing collection. The diary, the photo of my bruised arm from the bathroom mirror, the copies of forged loan documents, and now my voice, finally recorded. I had proof. Not enough to bring him down, maybe, but enough to be taken seriously if things turned. A few days later, a package arrived. It had no return address. The handwriting on the front was slanted and familiar, in a way that made my chest tighten. I opened it slowly. Inside was a letter, folded carefully in thirds, and a manila folder sealed with a single paperclip. The scent that wafted out, a mix of lavender and old books, hit me like a memory. It was Aunt Inez. I hadn't seen her in years, not since my uncle's funeral. She was my mother's older sister, the one everyone in the family referred to as the eccentric one, the one who lived alone, out in Oregon, never remarried. I was told she had chosen solitude, that she didn't believe in family values, but I always remembered her voice, low, steady, warm, and her eyes, they didn't blink much. She stared into people like she was reading more than they wanted her to see. The letter was long, 4 pages in her small, meticulous handwriting. It started like a journal, and ended like a warning. She wrote about her husband, how charming he had been, how supportive he looked in public, how dangerous he became when the doors closed. She wrote about the years she tried to survive by pretending it wasn't as bad as it was. She talked about the bruises, the isolation, the way everyone told her to give it time. But the line that stayed with me the most was the one near the end. You don't need their permission to save yourself. I read it 3 times. Then I opened the folder. Inside was a copy of the deed to the house I lived in. Our house. Except it wasn't ours. It was mine. It had been signed over by Marston's mother as a wedding gift years ago. The signature was clean, not forged. The property had been in my name all this time, and Marston never told me. He'd used it to secure loans, used my name, my signature, my credit, and all the while, he'd told me I didn't understand anything about money, that I wasn't equipped to handle our finances, that I should be grateful he handled it. I remember standing in the living room holding that folder, barely breathing, while the sun slipped down the side of the house. Everything clicked. Every piece fell into place. He didn't just want control. He'd built his entire foundation on my silence. That weekend, while he was at the store managing an inventory crisis, I made copies. I printed the insurance policy. I duplicated diary entries. I scanned pages, receipts, documents, bruises. I bought a USB drive from the gas station and loaded everything onto it. Then I found the name of a lawyer in Auntie Inez's letter, someone she said had helped her disappear once, back when no one believed her. I addressed an envelope, added a short note, and slid the USB inside. At the post office, I hesitated before dropping it in, but only for a second. When the envelope disappeared down the metal chute, I exhaled in a way I hadn't in years. That night, Marston was in a foul mood, his voice sharp, his patience thin. "You need to stop trying to sabotage me," he said, pacing the kitchen like a general in the middle of war. "You think you can outsmart me? You've never been that woman, Odessia. Don't start pretending now." I put my hands on the counter and met his eyes. "If anything ever happens to me," I said calmly, clearly, "a lawyer will know everything." He laughed, too loud, too long. "You think anyone's gonna believe you? Come on. You've got zero credibility. You sound paranoid." I didn't reply. I let his laugh echo through the kitchen, bouncing off the cabinets, the refrigerator, the walls he never had to punch because his words were enough to shatter everything. But something changed, something in his posture. For the first time, he looked over his shoulder. He tried to cover it up with a smirk, but I saw it. The flicker of doubt, the ripple of fear. And I tucked that moment away like a secret. The next morning, I returned to the spare bedroom and added another page to the folder. March 29th. Verbal threat. Called me a liability. Laughed when I warned him. Noted visible shift in his reaction. Fear present. I closed the journal, zipped the file shut, and placed it back in its hiding place. Then I pulled out the second recorder I'd bought with the groceries last week. I pressed record and waited. "You think you're untouchable?" I whispered. "But I've been watching you longer than you think." I played it back, saved the file. After dinner that night, while Marston sat in the recliner watching television, I cleaned the kitchen and slipped the recorder back in the drawer, behind the measuring cups. Later, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, letting the silence settle. It didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like strategy. The bus hummed beneath me, steady and low like a lullaby I didn't know I needed. I hadn't planned to fall asleep, but exhaustion had its own schedule, and I hadn't truly rested in years. When I opened my eyes again, the sky outside was blushing with the earliest hint of dawn, and I felt something I hadn't in a long, long time. Weightless. I didn't run away. I stepped out, and that distinction mattered. 3 hours earlier, I had stood motionless in the hallway of our home, watching Marston's shadow disappear into the bedroom after another one of his outbursts. It wasn't the words that broke something inside me this time, it was how normal they had become. "You're not worth the oxygen." That's what he had said in front of our friends after I didn't smile enough during a dinner toast. Just loud enough for the table to hear, quiet enough for no one to call him out. He laughed right after, of course, like it was a joke, except it wasn't. Later, after stumbling into bed, half drunk and fully self-righteous, he passed out with his mouth slightly open, snoring just enough to sound alive. I stood in the hallway for 10 straight minutes, still, eyes locked on the door like it was a cliff's edge, and I'd finally stepped to it. I didn't cry, didn't tremble. I was long past that. Instead, I moved. The first thing I did was pull the tote bag from the back of my closet, the one I'd kept prepped for months, packed in layers like a survival kit. A change of clothes, a second pair of shoes, a zippered pouch with cash, a burner phone, Inez's letter folded twice, a travel-sized toothbrush, and a laminated printout of the bus schedule out of Springfield. I left my regular phone on the kitchen counter, battery at full charge, and slid the SIM card out of it. Then I scribbled a note on plain paper and left it on the center of our bed. Do not call the police. You know why I left. I placed it under his pillow. At exactly 3:12 a.m., I stepped out the front door wearing a gray hoodie and sunglasses, even though it was still pitch dark. I didn't take the car. I walked, 5 blocks to the gas station, 7 more to the bus terminal. Each step away from that house was like peeling a layer of skin that didn't belong to me anymore. At the terminal, I bought a one-way ticket to a small town Inez had mentioned once in passing, a place no one in my family had reason to visit or even pronounce right. I boarded the bus quietly and took a seat near the back, close to the window, but not against it. I didn't look back. I didn't have to, because I knew he would wake up. And when he did, I wanted him to feel the silence louder than anything I'd ever screamed. Before the bus even left the city limits, I opened the side pocket of my tote and pulled out a flash drive. I held it in my palm for a long second, then connected it to the borrowed tablet I had hidden under my sweater. Inside were the recordings, months of them. His voice, low and sharp, calling me worthless, telling me I was a burden, telling me to keep my mouth shut, to stop asking questions, to know my place. And more than words, there were patterns, dates, tone shifts, threats, financial confessions. One night, he had been so furious after I accidentally closed the wrong browser tab on his laptop that he slammed a glass against the wall and shouted, "You're lucky I don't do worse." I had that too. All of it. I uploaded everything to a secure cloud drive linked to an anonymous email. I scheduled access to be sent to 2 sources if I didn't check in within 30 days. One to the lawyer Inez had once trusted. One to a women's justice foundation I'd been researching late into the night. Then I clicked on the scheduled file I had left on Marston's phone. It was set to autoplay at 7 o'clock a.m. Its title, "You always told me I wasn't smart enough." I imagined him waking up groggy, rubbing his eyes, annoyed by the buzzing phone next to him. I imagined the smug look fading as he pressed play and heard his own voice first, calling me names, threatening me, laughing about how easy it was to keep her quiet. And then my voice, steady, deliberate. "You forgot one thing. I was listening." Or I was always listening. By then, I'd be 3 towns away, somewhere with less noise, fewer questions. I shifted in my seat and glanced around the bus. The other passengers were either asleep or half awake, lost in their own thoughts, their own reasons for leaving. I leaned my head back and let my eyes close, not from fear this time, but from peace. It was quiet. A different kind of quiet than the one in our house. This quiet wasn't filled with dread, it was full of possibility. At 7:04 a.m., my burner phone vibrated once, just once. I opened it and saw a notification that the file had been accessed. He'd heard it. I didn't need to imagine his reaction. I wasn't going to waste a single second more on wondering. The nightmare wasn't me disappearing. It was him realizing that I had learned to do what he never thought I could. Make him visible, hold him accountable, tell the story he spent years trying to silence. I looked out the window, watching trees blur into one another as the bus curved through unfamiliar streets. I smiled. The kind of smile you only wear when you've finally stopped begging to be believed. The bus had pulled into my destination 3 hours earlier. I was already checked into the small, cash-only motel Inez had recommended. Beige walls, plastic cups wrapped in paper sleeves, the kind of place that didn't ask questions as long as you paid up front. I curled into the bed with my knees tucked tight, not because I was afraid, but because I was bracing for impact. It wasn't my life that would fall apart next. It was his. Turns out, when you stop being afraid of losing everything, you start gaining everything they're terrified of. By 8 a.m., the morning after I vanished, Marston had crafted the first of many lies. "She's going through a rough patch," he told people. "Needed a little time away." He went to church that Sunday without me and sat in the front row with a forced smile. He answered concerned texts with phrases like, "Marriage is a journey," and "She's just resting." He never reported me missing. But 2 days later, the first audio clip went live. It came from a small, anonymous account on a platform Marston barely knew existed. The title was simple: "Behind Closed Doors, Springfield's Favorite Husband." It was just 49 seconds long, but it was enough. His voice, clear, coarse, unmistakable. "You're a joke, a worthless nothing I'm stuck dragging around. If you disappeared, I'd get a raise in peace." The audio ended with silence, followed by my voice, calm and steady. "I used to think I was the problem. Now I know I'm the proof." It took less than an hour to spread. The comments came in waves. "Wait, this is Marston Langston? Isn't this the same guy who won that community award last year? Sounds about white. This is why we don't believe in perfect husbands." By that afternoon, his job suspended him, pending an internal investigation. His face vanished from promotional flyers. His name was quietly removed from the donor wall in the community center lobby. I watched it unfold from the tablet Inez had left for me. I sat at a diner counter, stirring cream into my coffee as I scrolled. There was no joy in it, no revenge thrill, just relief. The kind of relief that feels like taking your shoes off after walking for miles through glass. Then came Narina. She was younger than me by at least a decade, a nurse who had seen me the night I came in with the fractured rib. We had exchanged only a few words, me lying, her knowing better. She posted a video on her own social page. "I treated her," she said, her voice steady. "I asked the right questions, she gave the wrong answers, but I saw the bruises, I saw the fear, and I stayed silent. I won't do that again." Within 36 hours, her video had over 1.2 million views. Women filled the comments. "I know this story. I was this story. This is why we document everything. We are done whispering." My burner phone buzzed every few hours with updates from the cloud system I'd set up. Shares, reposts, messages to my anonymous email from journalists, lawyers, advocates. And then, Callista tried to step in. She posted a photo of Marston and me at our wedding, captioned with, "Every relationship has its struggles. Let's stop jumping to conclusions when we don't know the full story. My brother-in-law is a good man." She turned off comments within 10 minutes, but it was too late, because later that evening, her son, Ethan, uploaded a short video on his private school project channel. He was maybe 12 at the time. The video had nothing to do with our situation. It was a slideshow of a family brunch, but in the background, caught on camera, was Marston, leaning back in his chair, laughing, and saying, "She's not worth the oxygen. She just looks good standing next to me." The internet didn't forgive that one. Screenshots exploded across Twitter. Memes surfaced overnight. Someone created a filter using his quote. The headline on a local news page read, "Mr. Perfect's words say it all." Meanwhile, I sat on a park bench in a town too small for coffee chains, watching leaves fall and children bike past me with stickers on their helmets. I wasn't hiding. I was healing in silence. Each lie exposed didn't shock me. It freed me. It peeled off layers of shame I hadn't even realized I was still wearing. There were moments I'd read a cruel comment defending Marston and feel the sting all over again. But then someone else would reply fiercely, "She doesn't owe you her trauma. She's alive. That's enough. We believe her." The same words I used to whisper into my own palm, hoping someone would say them back. And finally, they had. That afternoon, just before sunset, I received an encrypted message from the lawyer Inez had connected me to weeks ago. Subject line, "Civil suit, ready. Body, we have more than enough to move forward. Also, 3 separate media outlets want to interview you. Would you be willing to speak publicly?" I stared at the screen. I could have said yes. I could have gone live, showed my face, let my name reclaim space it had been denied. But instead, I typed, "Not yet. Let the silence keep burning first." Because sometimes silence isn't weakness. It's the sound of preparation, the sound of someone sharpening truth like a blade. The next morning, after a restless night of pacing between my motel bed and the worn-out armchair near the window, I knew the time had come. I hadn't slept, not really. My mind moved like clockwork, checking, rehearsing, confirming what I already knew was ready. The silence had done its job. It had rattled the walls of his world. But now it was time to speak. There's a kind of power in letting them drown in the image they worked so hard to build. Marston had tried to plug every leak, extinguish every whisper, dismiss every accusation as exaggeration or emotional instability. But he couldn't outpace the truth, not when it was delivered by his own voice. He'd gone from being the town's golden boy to the man no one wanted to be seen with. His clients vanished first. Then his colleagues stopped returning his calls. Then the community boards he chaired quietly removed his name, and the church he once donated to issued a vague public statement about integrity under review. Neighbors stopped waving. Strangers started watching. And yet, he still walked around like he was owed something. That delusion finally cracked when the package arrived. There was no return address, no signature, just a flash drive inside an unmarked envelope tucked into his office mail by someone he didn't even notice. He plugged it in without thinking, because men like him never believed the house they built could burn. The video began with silence. Just the date, the time, then a voice, his own, berating me over a missed phone call. "You can't even keep the damn house clean and you think you get to ask where I was?" Another cut, him pacing across the living room. "You've got nothing without me. You know that, right?" Another clip. My face in the corner, barely in frame, tears sliding down my cheeks as he loomed just off camera. The last 30 seconds were black screen, just my voice. "You gave me nothing but silence, so I weaponized it." By that evening, his lawyer had called to inform him he was being served. A civil suit had been filed on my behalf. Emotional abuse, financial coercion, fraud, willful endangerment. The court date came 2 weeks later, and I showed up. The courtroom smelled like wood polish and cold coffee. Rows of folding chairs lined the back wall where press and observers sat elbow to elbow. Some wore ribbons, some wore pins. One woman I didn't recognize nodded at me as I passed. She didn't smile, just nodded, like she understood. Marston walked in wearing a gray suit that no longer looked tailored. His hair was thinner, his eyes sunken. He scanned the room as if expecting a rescue. None came. He looked at me once, then away. When the clerk called my name, I stood. Shoulders back, hair clipped short, no makeup except for a shade of lip balm that made me look less tired. I walked to the witness stand and laid the folder down. Inside, my diary, dates, entries, annotations. The deed, my name, my legal right, the hidden foundation of the house he leveraged for loans, the insurance policy, filed without my knowledge, his signature forged, my life assigned a dollar amount, financial records, withdrawals I never made, signatures I never wrote. A typed transcript, audio files backed by metadata, downloaded and time-stamped. I looked directly at the judge, then to the room. "You told me I was nothing without you," I began, voice steady, "but everything in this folder says otherwise." He didn't interrupt, neither did Marston's attorney. I continued, slower now. "This isn't revenge. This is documentation of what happens when a woman is made invisible, until she refuses to stay that way." There was no applause, no gasp, just silence, deep and resonant, like a breath being held. The judge nodded and moved on. The arguments began, but it didn't matter, because the moment had passed, and I hadn't flinched. The court didn't rule that day. These things take time, but the judge issued a temporary restraining order, froze assets in dispute. Marston was asked not to contact me in any form. His lawyer whispered something to him on the way out. He didn't look back. That night, I stepped out of the courthouse into a sea of camera flashes. It startled me at first. After all, I had spent so long avoiding being seen. But I kept walking. A reporter pushed forward, microphone in hand. Odessia, what would you say to other women going through what you did? I stopped, looked her straight in the eye, then into the camera. Disappear if you have to, but make sure they never forget you were here. Because sometimes silence is survival, and sometimes speaking up is how you take your name back. The morning after the courthouse, Inez poured my tea without asking how it went. She didn't need to. She'd seen the local paper, front page, bottom half, just above the weather report. The headline didn't name me directly, but the quote beneath it did. Disappear if you have to, but make sure they never forget you were here. I sipped slowly, my hands wrapped around the ceramic mug. It was quiet outside, just the sound of the waves somewhere beyond the pine trees. Her little house in Astoria wasn't much, but it was enough. One floor. No mirrors in the hall. A screened porch that caught the sun in the morning and the fog in the evening. That was all I needed now. Not every wound heals. Some just stop bleeding. I helped her repot herbs after breakfast. She had this old sink outside where we rinsed the soil off our hands, the kind that wobbled when the hose pressure kicked in. She'd say things like, "Don't crowd the basil," or "Time doesn't like drama," and I'd smile without speaking. Most days followed a rhythm now. I'd wake up before the birds, stretch on the porch with a blanket over my shoulders, drink chamomile from the same chipped mug. I kept my flip phone turned off unless I had somewhere to be. No apps, no buzzing, no news alerts screaming headlines about people like him or people like me. I left a lot behind, but some things you have to leave to ever feel free again. The attic in Inez's place held a small box I kept tucked behind an old trunk. Inside were letters, none of which I planned to send. One for my mother. One for Callista. One for Marston. The ink had dried months ago, but the words still throbbed when I touched the envelopes. The one to my mother read, "You didn't have to believe me, but you should have loved me anyway." The one for Callista was shorter, less angry. Just a list of the things she said that chipped away at me without her ever realizing. As for the one to Marston, it wasn't a letter. Just a single sheet of paper that read, "It wasn't the silence that broke me. It was what you filled it with." Inez never asked about the letters, but one afternoon while she was sorting laundry, she looked up and said, "There's peace in speaking, even if no one hears it but you." I nodded. She knew. She always had. Marston hadn't been convicted of anything, not technically. The civil case stalled after the restraining order, the asset freeze, the deposition. His name was too stained for him to fight it publicly, too arrogant to admit fault, so he faded. His business shut down. The storefronts closed quietly, one by one. The community groups stopped calling. His photo was scrubbed from websites. Even his church attendance stopped. Something about needing privacy during this spiritual season. Sometimes, his name pops up online in discussion threads. Women share their own stories under usernames like @InvisibleNoMore or @SheSurvivedSpringfield. And every so often, someone will post a blurry screenshot of his face and caption it, "Red flag husband, ask her." I see it, I read it, I close the tab, and I smile. Not cruelly, not triumphantly, softly, the way you smile when something heavy is finally no longer sitting on your chest. I started volunteering at a local shelter a few months ago, just 2 afternoons a week. I help women fill out protective order paperwork, gather documents, build timelines. I never say much about myself, just that I've seen enough to know you deserve better. Some of them recognize me from the news, some don't. I prefer it that way. There's one woman, Angela, who always brings her toddler with her. She was married to a sheriff's deputy who had a temper behind closed doors. She apologized the first few times the baby cried, until I told her, "This office has heard worse." She smiled at me then, really smiled. It was enough. One rainy afternoon, the sky split open and thunder rolled off the ocean like it was announcing something. Inez was out at the grocery store. I sat alone at the dining table with the old photo album I'd sworn never to open, and yet, I found our wedding picture, the only one I hadn't burned. Marston's smile, wide and rehearsed. My eyes, distant, but still pretending. I walked it to the fireplace. Lit a match. It didn't feel like triumph. No fireworks. No grand release. It just felt necessary. I watched the edges curl, blacken, flake into nothing. The photo collapsed inward, crumbling in slow-motion silence. As the last ember faded, I whispered to the empty room, "I forgive the girl who stayed too long, not the man who made her." It was the first time I said it aloud. It didn't need to echo. The room had already heard enough. That night, I sat on the porch in my thickest sweater, the wind brushing my skin like a warning. I opened my new journal. Not the evidence log, not the record of wrongs. Just a blank one, with thick pages and a green cover I'd picked out myself. I wrote about the garden. I wrote about Angela's son, who liked to climb onto the chairs when no one was looking. I wrote about the sky, and then, on the last line of the page, I paused, then wrote, "Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means I get to choose what comes next. Sometimes, survival doesn't look like fighting back. It looks like walking away in silence and letting the truth speak for itself." Odessia's story is a reminder that the strongest voices often come from those who were forced to whisper for too long. What would you have done in her place? Have you ever felt invisible in a room full of people who should have protected you? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful family stories that deserve to be heard.